Hey, here we are at the river walk, and it's underpopulated today, just how I like it. Just had a flock of people coming through, kids on bikes with their mom, I think about 6. You know, flying through, and I like riding bikes too, but not here. I think it takes away from, speeds things up, accelerates them too much. Kind of miss the atmosphere, the bird calls, the animals. You might see a snake or squirrel. There's a squirrel right there, not 6 feet away. Nope, not scared at all. And last talk was about primate hierarchies, some other things like that, fighting, acquiescing, and the defeated. And this time, an insight which relates to nature a bit. If you consider, say, an ant colony, it's like each ant is its own being in a sense, but then they're also collective. You could say that, and it's been said before, that an ant colony is like one organism, one mind. You know, you could look at the queen as being a gland, and the rest, you know, is having different duties. But here we are, you know, the human race, each of us individual, in a sense like cells. But in the human body, all the cells work toward a common goal. So each individual cell has reproduction capabilities, growth, digestion, excretion, breathing, all these things. Each individual cell has that. But then in the body, the cells join together and work together for the good of the total organism. So they are the total organism. They're individual, but they're not. And what we're seeing with humanity is it's really as if each individual is a cell with all those capabilities that a cell has, and perhaps more. A cell has a nervous system, but it doesn't necessarily have thought, although it senses a lot of things energetically. So anyway, we as sort of cells in the organism of the human race are not currently working together. We are so isolated from each other and mainly uncooperative that this is actually responsible for the situation that we're in. So you could look at the situation and at the human race as individuals and as collectively too, and imagine that the perhaps we're on the brink of a new phase where all the humans individually cooperate together collectively as one thing. I know what you're thinking. That would be so horrible. What would happen to individuality? We would all become communists or something, right? I don't think so. You already see these behaviors in families, you know, at least if the families are non-toxic. And you see them in some other places as well. So it's not impossible, but certainly cooperation will get everyone a lot further than this fear-based, mindless competition. So anyway, that's the thought. It's like, is that the next phase for humanity? Does humanity even have phases? Does intelligence, life have phases? Like, yes, it does. I was talking to a friend about art the other day. He just took up painting, and he was struggling a little bit with perspective. He had put the horizon line up at the top of the picture, and it's not that you can't do that, but in this case, in this picture, it didn't work very well. So he mentioned, you know, the history of perspective in art and when it started. And I knew something about that already. So I said, yeah, well, what happened with perspective in art, there was a point in European art where there essentially was none. It was very flat, and there weren't, you know, buildings or anything rendered in perspective. What we think of as having a vanishing point or a horizon line, multiple vanishing points, three-point perspective. But at some point it was created, it was invented, and the interesting thing is that when those first pictures were made using perspective and vanishing points, people initially couldn't comprehend them. They looked at them and were puzzled. They, you know, and I said to my friend, I said, think of a giant mural that's done in perspective, drawn in perspective. If a cat or a dog looks at it, do they see the perspective? Do they get the effect? It's like, no, of course they don't. Now, dogs or cats can often watch a television set. They're drawn to the motion, but they don't understand. They don't comprehend perspective on a 2D plane. But what happened was that people adjusted and their minds became capable of accepting, partaking in the illusion of 3 dimensions on a 2D plane. And then what happened? It spread. It spread quickly, and soon everyone saw the illusion. So that was a what's the word? Not a barrier. Well, you could say it was a barrier, but it was basically a new paradigm where the human mind expanded to a new level with a new capability. So, and I also pointed out that with Asian art, they also did not use perspective. They placed a more distant object higher in the picture and closer objects lower in the picture. And you can show some examples of that. So someone's coming, gonna take a little break. So you might wonder about humanity in the world, why all this weird stuff, bad stuff is happening, and has been happening for quite some time. And it's been said by some that where we are is the Earth is an experiment in duality, free choice, and currently it's the only one in the universe, right? Now think about that. It's a little hard to swallow maybe, but it could very well be true. You know, you might think, well, the universe is awfully big and there are other beings in the universe, you know, maybe gray aliens. It's like, but then think about it. It's like, do gray aliens have free choice in the same way that we do? Do they have political parties? Do they dress differently? Do they do things to draw attention to themselves as individuals? Or are they more or less all the same being? You know, you can't tell the difference between one or another. So anyway, or you might say, well, Hoffman, you just quoted, talked about primate hierarchies in their politics. It's like, aren't they manifesting free will and choice when they decide who to fight and who to support and all that? It's like, well, no, that could be considered natural competition, because the primate groups, chimp tribes or whatever, don't see a way out of those patterns. Those patterns are tied to their survival. They all partake in them in some level, some degree. And the only, they're not capable of moving outside it intellectually. So you might think, well, how could that work? Let's see. Well, if one chimp got kicked out of the tribe and he was extra intelligent and had a lot of time to think about things, maybe he could be the new Jesus Christ of the monkey tribe. You know. But that doesn't seem likely. And I think that's probably due to the size of the monkey brain and the human brain. That's why humanity seems, evolutionarily speaking, to be a final end product. It's not going to evolve further, because the goal was to have the largest brain possible, and due to biology and the size of the female pelvis and so on, the head and brain can't get any larger. So anyway, getting back to the duality plane and free will, the free will experiment on Earth, it also coincides with the sixth mass extinction of life on Earth, which is most likely caused by us. And so where do we go from there? How does the experiment end? Is the experiment going to end? Good question. So, a couple last thoughts on these subjects of what I will probably call Planet of the Oops. How we get caught up in all these fighting scenarios, dramas, politics, and so on is funny, because say, for example, someone does something and on the surface immediately you don't approve of that. You get angry, you react. For one thing, you might not even fully understand what you saw. And in most cases, people don't. When it comes to conversations, for example, most people misunderstand a good deal of what's said. And they'll respond with something else, and it'll go in a different direction, and you know, and that's kind of, if you listen to dialogue between people, that's kind of what happens. Very chaotic and sort of directionless. But I wanted to mention, you know, anger, which fuels a lot of these dramas. And say someone does something, you know, that you find offensive or something, or makes you angry. Perhaps you're cut off in traffic. Perhaps you imagine that you've been slighted in some way. Perhaps, as I said, there's no basis for it at all, but that's your perception. So you, even if you don't react overtly, you know, you carry this in you, a sort of an energy, a thought, a feeling of anger, or, you know, irritation, resentment at being slighted. Well, what is that exactly? What is going on? They do something happens external to you, you react, now you have essentially something in you that you're carrying. What's happened? Well, what's happened is that you have given the other person the power to affect your own happiness. Here comes someone on a bike. Yeah, that's it. You gave them the power. You might ask yourself, it's like, why are people like this? Why are they so argumentative and prone to fighting and disagreement and things like that. To approach that question from a psychological perspective, you might look at what's called the core self. The core self is a developmental phase. It's the product of a developmental phase from up to about age 7, somewhere like that. So the events that happen to you at that point, up to that point, where basically your mind is operating on theta waves. In a sense, it's like hypnosis. You're not learning things by rote, which you will in school later, but just simply by osmosis, you're absorbing them. So this is why we need to take very, very good care, mindful, kind care of children in this age bracket, because that core self basically is going to pilot that person's life for the rest of their lives, unless they can, profoundly understand and move around it, but in most cases that doesn't happen. So traumas, fears, all sorts of things that happen during that time get carried forward. They become essentially the person themselves. So you cannot alter the core self. The experiential levels that come later, which tend to be in 7-year increments, they add to your experience, they add to your history, but they never alter the core self. So anyway, when we look at people who are difficult, in politics, without naming names, think about that, think about that child that was unloved or traumatized or had polio. You know who I'm talking about? So anyway, I'm at the end of the trail here. I'm going to sign off for today. Thanks for watching.